Here. Okay, thanks. This morning we talked a little bit about facing the giants in the land, and we sort of alluded to a couple of kinds of things that one might do to minister in the academy. But what I'd like to do this afternoon is to really share with you more details of examples of kinds of things that God might call you to do. Not necessarily the same things I'm doing, but will stimulate your imagination to think about in your university, in your subject area, with your personality and gifts and talents, that God would help you to think in the most creative way about how you can have a presence. I thought the talk on mathematics was just brilliant this morning. And fortunate for us, it didn't have much mathematics, which was probably helpful for many of us here, although I actually know some math. And I think that was a wonderful example. I have to add one little footnote to that. My first year at Colorado School of Mines, as a young 24-year-old professor, I got the favorite professor award for the whole university. Now that was supposed to be like a teaching award, but in fact I know I was not that great of a teacher. I was a pretty good beginning teacher, but it was because of the kinds of things that were shared this morning that I think students appreciated. The fact that they knew I cared about them and I wanted to do everything I could to help them and to sort of be living out grace in the way that I taught. I like the expression, students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And so I think doing what God would call us to do anyhow also probably helps your teaching evaluations, okay? So it's a sort of a win-win. There's no downside on this to doing what God's called us to do. Let's pray before we start. Father, what a great day it's been. What a neat way you're filling our cups with all of the different wonderful things that are being shared, with the good conversations we're having at breaks. And so we thank you and praise you for these gifts of new ideas, new insight, new encouragement and inspiration. And Father, I pray as we go through this next hour that we would just continue in the way that we have so far, hearing from you as you speak into our lives through the things that are being shared. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, we're going to go fast, so I'll get through on time. Here's one of my favorite pictures, and it's a great metaphor for what I want to be sharing this afternoon. This is a real picture. It's not photoshopped where they stick people in there where there really wasn't anybody. There was a big tsunami that happened some years ago in the Atlantic. There's the famous light tower off the coast of France, I think. And as this tsunami moved through the Atlantic Ocean, they didn't have all the communication means that we have today. And so the guy who's at the lighthouse has no idea there's this big tsunami wave coming. And so he probably steps out the door and he sings, "Oh, what a beautiful morning," because he doesn't know what's coming. And all of a sudden, as he's standing there, the waters begin to rush around. So here's the bigger picture, and then up close it looks like this, and you say, gosh, this guy had no idea of what was coming. And fortunately, the end of the story was he heard noise. He had no idea of what was the cause. He couldn't see because where he was standing, he couldn't see back around. And just in the nick of time, he jumped inside the thing, shut the door, and avoided being swept away. Now, I think this is a picture of what happens to college students when they go off to the university today, because many of them and their parents think college is a safe place, right? Crime rate's low, not too many burglaries, robberies, et cetera, and so they think that their kids are really safe. But what they don't understand is there's a huge amount of danger in what goes on in college today, both outside of college, maybe in terms of drugs and stuff, in college in terms of the kind of ideas and the sort of the mindset that they often will develop as they go through college. It's an intellectually very dangerous time of life. And I think part of what God has placed Christian professors on campus to be are lighthouses to help students avoid having shipwreck during those critical years that they go through college. I think most kids, one way or the other, during their college years are going to set their direction in terms of what they believe. And a lot of them are going to take what they learned growing up in their families, and they'll be reevaluating that as they go through college, because for the first time, they can't really, in a sense, ride the spiritual coattails of their parents. They don't have the supervision they have there. Now they're going to really start to own whatever it is that they're going to own. And so it's a crucial time for us to be lighthouses to these kids as they go through to help them to avoid shipwreck. Okay, I want to talk about some first principles, ministering to people on campus, both students and faculty. I'm going to talk briefly about the outrageous idea of Christian scholarship, and then a little challenge at the end. Let's begin with first principles. There's a famous musical called Godspell that has a wonderful theme song that's called Day by Day. Do y'all some know that song? I would try to sing it, but I'm a really bad singer. To see thee more clearly, to love thee more dearly, to follow thee more nearly, day by day. You know that song, okay. I thought it was amazing that two Jewish guys who wrote this rather interesting Broadway play wrote such a beautiful song, and then I later discovered, no, they cribbed it from somebody else who was obviously a very with-it Christian and wrote this song. But I think I like this because it's one of the things I want to try to do every day, to see thee more clearly, to love thee more dearly, to follow thee more nearly day by day. And that's a sort of a nice, simple summary, isn't it, of what the Christian life's ultimately about. If I'm doing these things, then God's going to make me a nice, bright lighthouse in the various ways that we'll be talking about today. Matthew 5:16, we talked about that this morning. Let your light so shine before your students. Now I'm cheating on these a little bit, okay, please forgive me. You're not supposed to change a dot or a tittle, and I'm changing words. But you understand I'm sort of applying this to us. Let your light so shine before your students and colleagues that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Ephesians 6:7, serve heartily as if you were serving the Lord and not your department head, okay? When we're working hard and trying to do well, we're often doing it for the department head, for the dean, for tenure. But our real calling is what? To please God and to work in a way that's going to make Him say, well done, thy good and faithful servant. If I do that well, then I think my department head and my dean and so forth will probably be pleased. But whether they are or aren't, I ultimately am not concerned about, okay? I once had a department head tell me, you would get a lot more awards if you weren't such a sort of visible Christian around here. Some people don't like that. And I told him, I'm perfectly happy with that because those aren't the real awards, okay? The real awards are the ones I'm going to be getting later, and not worried about these. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as if you were working for the Lord and not for your dean. Again, a reminder, when I'm working hard, I need to keep a focus on who it is ultimately that I'm trying to please. No matter how much you publish, you're going to perish anyhow, so get over it, okay? This isn't a verse, so I'm calling it Bradley 1:1. We mentioned that this morning. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Again, we need to remember that. I remember the first several years when I was working on tenure, I was tempted to say, well, I'm going to wait and try to have some time to have a Christian influence after I get tenure, because I don't have time right now. But I really didn't feel like, as I thought about it and prayed about it, that for me, that God wanted me to do that. He brought me there. And really, my first 2 years, it was an experiment, because had it gone poorly, I would have quit and gone on to do something else. I wasn't committed to being a professor. So thought I'd better sort of experiment a lot the first 2 years and kind of decide what God's calling me to do. Let us professors not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. And what's the application of that for professors? I think one of the biggest problems on most campuses is you may be the only Christian in your department. And you really feel that, don't you, sometimes? You sort of feel like odd man or odd woman out, and like you have some critically important things that you can't really engage with other people in your department. And I have found at the 3 different schools I've been at, I'm a little bit of an itinerant worker, sort of move around, but that it's so important to develop Christian community with other colleagues and maybe some professional staff where you work. The people that I go to church with, more by and large, don't understand what the life of an academic's like. They have no idea of what the challenges are. They probably don't even understand what the opportunities are. They just say stupid things like, oh, you only teach 2 courses? What do you do with the rest of your time? And the answer is, it's a long story. You'd never understand, you know. You ever hear people say that, though? Gosh, the life of a professor must be really nice. Well, we must be really stupid because it takes 50 or 60 hours a week to teach those 2 courses and do the other little odds and end things that we're supposed to do. So it's really, really helpful to have colleagues, people who live in your world, who understand your challenges, who can pray for you, who can sympathize with you when you have different disappointments and shortcomings and so forth. You have something like you got a paper rejected. you can tell your Sunday school class that and they say, so what's the big deal? You know, I mean, they don't understand about some of these things, you know, they don't get it. So you need Christian friends on campus. And so I would encourage you, if there isn't already a group on your campus, try to identify some of the different people on your campus that are Christians. I don't know what the best way to do that is. I would say talk to Cheryl and Randy. They can help, right? That's, because they can network. They may know people on your campus that you don't know, and I think part of their what the benefit they bring is to some of these campuses is they help to get people together in a critical mass, and I think that's really, really important. How often should you do this? You know, I don't know. At all the schools I've been at, we always got together once a week because I really feel like I need that encouragement on a regular basis. Once a month, well, maybe if you have a speaker, you say we have a speaker once a month, but we get together every week and pray together, maybe do some kind of study together, support each other. Okay, last one. Professors who sow sparingly reap sparingly, and professors who sow abundantly reap abundantly. Now, obviously, I cheated on that one as well. I cribbed something that the Apostle Paul wrote and just adapted it. But I think as I get to heaven someday, I'm really excited to be able to say I've had the opportunity as a professor to do a lot of sowing and some reaping. So by faith, I'm saying what? The more sowing I do, the more God's going to bless what I've done, and we're going to see when I get to heaven ultimately how it turned out. But every now and then I get a little sort of a preview. I gave a talk at Texas A&M last fall on is there scientific evidence for the existence of God. The talk I've given a lot of places. And I had a fella come up afterwards. It was in my class in 1988. And he said, you probably don't remember me, but I was in your class in 1988, and so you always have to fake this, right? Oh, yeah, you know. Well, I mean, that's not really a lie. I'm just trying to be gracious. But anyhow, I didn't remember him. But, and he said, you invited us for pizza at the end of school, the last day of class, to share how and why you had become a Christian. And of course, I went partly for the pizza, but I was kind of curious. And he said, what you shared that day was the beginning of a spiritual journey for me. And I never had another conversation with him. A&M's a big school. I never had him in another class. And he didn't come back by and talk further. But he said that he was now a very committed Christian. He's an elder in his church. He's doing all these great things. And I thought, wow, I so appreciate you coming and telling me that. And I look forward to hopefully meeting, you know, as they say, may your tribe increase. Hopefully there's a lot more out there that are like that. So a lot of times we think what we're doing is insignificant. The kids don't care. And sometimes it will really shock you, some of the people that come back. I had a guy, the first year I was at Colorado School of Mines, they did really profanity at the football games. And I was really appalled by that. And so I wrote a letter to the newspaper saying it's understandable why, with the kind of crude chance you have at the football game, that Colorado School of Mines guys can't get dates. Because no self-respecting woman would go out with somebody who acts like this. And then a guy who was in my class wrote a letter back in saying, are you trying to say my wife's not a lady? You know? And I thought, well, I wanted to say, well, you know, if the shoe fits, wear it. But somebody else wrote back in and said, yeah, she likes that and she isn't a lady. And anyhow, it went on for 6 weeks in the school newspaper. It was a great conversation. I never went back to another football game, but I hope it cleaned the thing up a little bit. 5 years, I got a really bad course evaluation from this guy. He didn't have his name on it, but he's saying, you know, I shared my testimony in class and a couple things. Oh, way too religious, blah, blah, blah. But it was really about his wife, who I'd said wasn't a lady, which was actually true. 5 years later, he calls me and says, I want to come by and visit. And I thought, gosh, what for? we were never friends when you were here before, so I don't know. I said, okay, sure, come by. And he came by and he said, my first job was in Midland. The people next door were Christians, and as much as I sort of was offended at some of the things that you said about the football game and my wife, I remembered some of the other things that you said and did and the example that you said. And he said, it really made me quite open to the overtures that these people had, and through their influence and encouragement going to church, he'd become a Christian. And he said, I wanted to come by because I thought you would never believe it. And I said, you're absolutely right. I am shocked. Now, I hope to get to heaven and have a lot of shock, you know, and say, gosh, I never thought you would have made it. Tell me your story. This is going to be really, really good. So my point is, You know, you never know. Throw lots of seeds, you know, God will water them, He'll take care of them in some other way. I never felt any pressure to try to have anybody pray to receive Christ. I had some kids that have done that at various times, but it wasn't because I was planning pressure, it was because they really were there and they wanted to do it. But I've had lots of opportunities to sort of sow and to water where other people have sowed. Okay, ministering to students. First day of class is your key opportunity. If you have never read the book Blink, you should read it. Okay, it's a bestseller and basically says in today's modern culture, people make very quick first impressions that set in cement fast. And so we have sort of a personality cult rather than a character cult culture. And the net result is that people make fast opinions first. So quite apart from being a Christian, the first day of class, if they think you're boring and dull, then no matter what you do after that, they may continue to think you're boring and dull. So get your best tap dance and song and dance together for that first day of class. I also feel like because of that, if I'm going to identify myself as a Christian, I always do that the first day of class. And we've already mentioned that before. Promise it'll make a difference and begin by learning their names. It's amazing how much students value that because it's really not that I know their name, it's that it says, you're important enough to me that I'm going to know your name. And when you know their name, it opens up all kinds of other opportunities. When you see them around on campus or go eat in the student cafeteria, whatever, you can go up and call them by name and sit down and have a chat with them. It's really, really it's a key. It's not the only key, but if you don't know their name, then you're not going to get very far with them, okay? I loved what was shared this morning, and so I've already adopted some of it and put it in red just to do attribution to our fine presentation by Francis this morning. Let your teaching be seasoned with grace in all that implies. And learning names is just one example of the many different ways you can love and care for your students. And you know the university is such a place of alienation today. You don't have to do a bunch of this for them to say it makes a difference because there's almost none out there. It's a grace desert at the average university. Okay. Second thing, I recommend, this is a slide that was in a day when Leadership U was quite a popular place for people to have a website for faculty. I don't think it's really functioning in that way anymore, but there are other places, and I think maybe that depends on where you are. I don't know if Randy or Cheryl have a good suggestion for where you would recommend faculty put a testimony if they wanted to do that. This was in the early days of the internet, and there wasn't that many good choices. Now you can do it in all kinds of ways. So you can have a Facebook and put all this kind of stuff on. I was telling Dr. Walkup that if he hadn't come to this conference, I was going to friend him and then defriend him is a way of getting even for him not coming.
Well, for Meet the Prof is a good site.
Okay. And if you Google search, can you get that, Meet the Prof?
Yes.
Okay. So it's a good place to have a testimony. Now, what I like about this is I'm not going to take a lot of class time sharing my testimony. I think that's maybe trying to do too much in class time. Identifying myself as a follower of Christ is part of introducing who I am and trying to connect with the students in a more personal way. So that's perfectly fine. I waited 40 years for the ACLU to try to sue me, and they never did. Because I would love to have had that opportunity to sort of butt heads with them over that. Because every study you have that says pedagogically, what do you want to do with your students? You want to establish personal connections. That means not just being a sort of a plastic figure who gives lectures. Somebody who's a real person, and the kids appreciate that, whether they happen to be Christians or not. They appreciate your being open with them. Okay, so first day of class, I invite my students to go and check this out if they'd like more information about how I became a follower of Jesus. Now, I've often thought it would be fun the first day of class to come in some sort of a funny costume with the big buck teeth and some funny hairdo and introduce myself kind of without them realizing who I really was or what I was like, and telling them there's something really, really weird about me that you should know, but I would be embarrassed to talk about it in class. But here's where you can go find out. Now, students would have all kinds of imaginations of all kinds of things, but trust me, 100% of them would go and look immediately, right? But now here's what's interesting. What I shared with them is pretty innocuous. The first year I did this, I asked the people who hosted the website, Leader U, to tell me how many hits I got on my personal testimony that week from Texas A&M. And they can do that. They can trace these things. And they told me 150 hits. Now that semester I had 100 students in class. So that's really pretty good, isn't it? Maybe not all of them went, but some of them went more than once or told their friends. I actually got one email from a parent who said, what you shared in class with my son today, he'll probably remember long after he forgets all the stuff you teach him about material science. And I didn't say that much. You know, the position you have as a professor gives you a great deal more authority and influence than we often realize, you know. And the fact that this was shared made a big difference. When I was a graduate student, I shared with a class of business calculus students. I was just teaching to make extra money because I was poor. My NSF fellowship wasn't that lucrative. And one semester I almost didn't do it because there were a bunch of Jewish kids in this class, and I thought they will be offended and they will report me and I'll get into trouble and they will fire me from my $200 a month job or whatever they paid at that time. Something horrible. Would be relieved to be fired. But I went ahead and did it. I was near graduation. I couldn't figure out how they could keep me from graduating. It was my last semester. And I got a call that night from the Dean of Students for the whole University of Texas. And he calls up and he says, this is Dean Johnson. And then before he could explain who he was, I said, yes, sir, I know exactly who you are. Couldn't figure out why. And so he went on to say, I've been trying to reach you. He said, I've called every Bradley in the phone book. Are you the one that teaches business calculus? And I said, I am the one who teaches business calculus. And he said, well, I've called all these names, and I went and looked later. Walter comes kind of at the end of the line. It was 25. He said, the two twins that are in there, I'm sorry, his name was Campbell, the Campbell twins that are in your class? I said, uh-oh. He said, they're my kids. And I went, gosh, I was worried about the Jewish students. I didn't know the Dean of Students for the whole university had 2 kids in my class. And he said, they came home. I've been worried about them. They're sophomores now or juniors. He said, they've wandered away from the Lord. They're not, I was really concerned about them. And he said, I don't know what you said in class today, but they came home and had a long talk with me. And I thought, boy, it's amazing because I didn't say that much. God can take the little words that we speak and breathe into them amazing power. And apparently the conversation he had with them was sufficiently significant. He called 25 people to say thanks. You never know who's sitting in your audience. You never know what they're up to. I've had one student who I shared at the beginning of the semester who said, I was thinking of committing suicide. And I don't even know why I came to class today. And now I know why. So lots of good opportunities. They're doing really simple things and not necessarily pushing the envelope at all. Okay, so here's what my website looked like. It had a biographical sketch. It had my personal testimony. It had some articles that I'd written having to do with faith and science. I didn't put any in there on material science. I thought they really wouldn't be interested in that. So, okay. Ministering to students, I think, can also be done, depending on what you teach, by including a Christian worldview where appropriate in teaching and assignments. And I think many of you who teach in literature and philosophy, in history, in political science, even in economics. I have friends who teach economics that say, boy, there's a lot of sort of built-in presuppositions and worldview stuff in economics that really it's worth fleshing out as you're helping students understand. Here are the assumptions, okay? One of the basic assumptions in economics has to do that people always act in their economic self-interest and so forth, and they think that material gain is equal to happiness, and so that's how they behave. Now, whether that happens to be true or not, if that's what people think is true, then the economic models work. And so there are lots of places to do that. In engineering, I insisted that in engineering ethics, when I was department head of mechanical engineering, we were developing a new engineering ethics course, and I said we are going to teach something about ethics based on revelation, as in religious-based ethics. And all of the ones that they were going to teach were just pure secular ethics, like utilitarianism and Kantian ethics and so forth. And I said, in this university, probably half the kids have some religious background. It would be stupid to not see how that fits in to the ethical behavior we're trying to encourage for them as engineers. And so they said, well, that's really good, but we don't know what to say about that. And would you be willing to teach those 2 classes? And I said, of course. So for 7 or 8 years, basically, we included that, and the students really appreciated it. It didn't send out like a sore thumb. It was sort of saying there are different ways to determine your ethical behavior, and one of them is reason, the other is experience, the other is revelation. Kind Kantian ethics really has, or utilitarian ethics has one rule. Okay, the Bible has 10 rules and a bunch of smaller ones. It actually is in many ways much more versatile and gives much more specific advice. The problem with utilitarianism when you're talking about difficult questions in Kantian ethics is they give you conflicting answers on a lot of stuff. So it was easy to sort of do this in a very academic way. It wasn't done in a kind of a Sunday school way at all, but it worked. I have a good friend named Ron Larson who he's passed away, in sociology, and he basically was able to take psychiatry and help people discover that religious beliefs are an important variable when you're dealing with people who have various kinds of psychological problems. The scuttlebutt had always been that religious belief corresponds with more crazy, right? But nobody had ever really studied that before. And so he did some very, very careful meta studies in which he generated a huge amount of data, and he basically was able to show there are huge benefits and high correlations with people who have deeply held religious beliefs and many other positive psychological outcomes. And this was so persuasive. Then he did it with medical things and how their health is and how fast they get well from illness and so forth. And the data was just overwhelming to the point that a third of the medical schools in the United States started offering courses that had to do with how to encourage whatever medical outcomes that are positive through your patient's religious beliefs. And the courses said, it doesn't make any difference whether you're religious or not. The data shows this is very positive. And if it is, then you ought to be prepared not to poopy-do it, but to encourage it. And so he transformed the whole field. He almost got kicked out of graduate school because he was interested in stuff like this. And they said, you can't be a PhD psychiatrist and be like that. And he was able to change his whole field. Okay, here's another fun example. Have students over for a movie night. And this is one that almost anybody can do. This is really low threat, low risk. Have kids over for a movie night, show an interesting movie. When I invited my students over, I'd say, this is going to be not just free pizza, although it will be free pizza. It's not going to be just a movie for entertainment, although it will be entertaining. But it really is to provide an opportunity for all of us together to have a conversation about some interesting, important question about life. So I'm going to choose movies that are excellent entertainment, but raise interesting questions about life. And so I would tell the students ahead of time. There was no bait and switch. The kids would come, we would feed them. I put 5:30 to 8:30. Now, why do you suppose I put 5:30 to 8:30 there? We used to have it later, but we were then competing with beer drinking and hell-raising and other stuff that goes on Friday nights, and we wanted to start early to get ahead of that. So they weren't choosing between coming to my movie or going out and getting drunk. If they were going to go out and get drunk, then they could do that later. If we did it earlier, the people I wanted to reach were people that did have alternative plans and interests, right? So, and it worked well. When we did this, we would typically have anywhere from 15 to 30 students come. My favorite movie on this is Crimes and Misdemeanors. If you've never seen this movie before, it's a perfect prototype of what we want. Every movie on this list I can be discussed afterwards with 3 simple questions. What is the question this movie raises? What is the answer to that question that this movie gives? Do you agree or disagree, and why? Okay? Now, the reason those questions always work is I'm only going to pick movies that raise interesting questions. In Woody Allen's movie, Crimes and Misdemeanors, the question is, if there isn't a God, can there be moral structure to the universe? Now, as you might suspect, Woody Allen gets it exactly right. If there isn't a God, there isn't moral structure. If there is a God, there is moral structure. His conclusion at the end of the movie, as you get through it, is there isn't a God and there isn't moral structure. I don't care if the movies get the answer right. What's important is that the movies make the question really interesting, right? Suppose it gave the right answer and it made it into a very boring question. That wouldn't be very helpful, would it? Because the goal is not to give them a pat answer, it's to get them into an engaging discussion. And with Woody Allen, I've never, ever not had good discussions with that. Groundhog Day, there's lots of stuff on the internet that tells you this is a really interesting movie that has a lot of philosophical implications. Chariots of Fire, if you know this one, it got Best Movie of the Year in about 1984. Wonderful story about what motivates one, what gives one purpose in life. 2 contrasting examples of a guy who's running for his own glory, for his own significance, for his own meaning, and a guy who's a wonderful Christian who's running for the glory of God. And it's a great, great story. It's based on a true story. Citizen Kane out of Africa. If you haven't seen this, it got Best Movie of the Year, and it really, I think, raises the question, can you really have love without commitment? Because in today's world, people want to pretend that commitment's not necessary, right? You can have love without any commitment. We want free everything, including love. And it's a great movie, I think, to raise that. When Ann and I first did this, we thought the guys will all be saying, yes, you can, and the girls will all be saying, no, you can't, okay? And surprisingly, the first two girls that commented were acting like, gosh, Meryl Streep was really hard on Robert Redford in this movie. She was making too many demands on him. And I'm going, boy, you know, we were farther down the road than I thought culturally on some of these things. Okay. There's other movies. Somebody was suggesting The Matrix. I think you think The Matrix is a good movie. And everybody can watch that and try to figure, are we in or are we out or where are we, right? Really scary? Okay. So what can happen? Okay, let's suppose you were to identify yourself as a Christian the first day of the semester and maybe have a website someplace with your testimony or things you've written. If in our case we had Christian speakers come to campus once or twice a semester, and I would invite my students to that and some would come. I would have movie nights 1 night per month. And Ann and I loved doing this. It was really fun. This is not work, okay? This is just pure fun. I had 100 students in my classes that semester, 150 hits on my testimony, 60 came to movie nights. Now, that's not 60 different students. There were 60 total, and some of them were repeat customers. Some never came. Missed a good time. Free pizza. At the end of the semester, I asked the students, after their final grades were in, if they would be interested in being in a Bible study on the Gospel of John. And why I did this, I only ever did this once with really asking them in this way. I was really curious to see, am I really doing any good? You know, I'm throwing seeds out, are they really making any difference? And I was pleasantly surprised. Of the kids that were in my class, I would guess probably 50 of them were Christians and 50 not, maybe. This is Texas, okay, so it's reasonable. But I wrote the invitation in a way that was clear to the Christian students. I wasn't really wanting them to come. This was really a seeker Bible study. I didn't quite use that term. So of the 50 that weren't, I had 13 that basically indicated they wanted to come. Now, I later sent them a note saying, I was just kidding, this is for a study I was doing. No, I didn't need that. I said, of course, we had our study on the Gospel of John, okay? Now, you're just a data point in my study to see what's going on here. And out of that particular study, a guy named Paul Wells, the guy on your right, was a sophomore. He was one of the few kids that ever came to one of my movie nights and admitted to being an atheist, and very comfortably and confidently shared why he agreed with Woody Allen in the Crimes and Misdemeanors movie and so forth. He was also the best student in my class that semester. So we got to be friends. I offered him a job working in my lab because he really was a good student. And over time we got to know each other, and then he ended up coming to my Gospel of John study, and here's what he wrote me about 6 years later. You may use the photos, this one and some other ones he sent me, whenever and wherever you like. I've shared my testimony with many over the years, and I always point to the group discussion at your house after watching Crimes and Misdemeanors, the Bible study you had, led on campus covering the book of John, and the letter you sent me while I was in the German hospital as turning points in my belief. He almost died when we were doing a study abroad thing in Europe. Those things that you did, I hope to emulate when I'm a professor, because I have seen firsthand the impact a Christian professor can have on bringing his students to a relationship with Jesus, and you can quote me on that. The picture there was Paul at his thesis defense, where he's just defended his dissertation, and is now a PhD. So it was really, and again, you don't hear from everybody, you don't get to keep up with everybody, but when you're sowing seeds, trust me, God is working. And we need to be faithful in doing that. Here's another neat young lady. Her name's Amy. At the end of the semester, I mentioned previously I give books out. The book I like to give best is Case for Faith by Lee Strobel. If you've never read this book, I'm sorry, not the Case for Faith, Case for Christ. This isn't in your notes. I think I just added it, but put Case for Christ. Case for Faith is also good, but Case for Christ is the one I give. And the way I do this, I take a box of books, put it out in the hall, and tell the kids at the final exam, as they're leaving, I have a gift for them. I've enjoyed having them in my class, And it's a book outside that's called The Case for Christ, that if they're interested, please take one. I also tell them, I bought this with my own money, and so don't take one if you aren't intending to read it, okay? I just want them to understand this is not a freebie from somebody else. No, it's a freebie for me, but it's not free for me. And so I want them to take it. And I'll typically get 50 or 60% of the kids taking them. Some of them are already Christians, some aren't, okay? Okay, so Amy took one of these books in May at the end of the semester. She came back in August, and she said, could I buy 4 more of those Case for Christ books? And I said, well, sure. If you'll tell me why, I'll give you a discount, okay? And she said, well, of course, anything for a discount. She said, I read that book over the summer and became a Christian. She said, I came from a broken home. I have a mother and father who are divorced and 2 siblings that are very dysfunctional. And what I'd like to do is to give you each one of them a copy of that book. So I said, your discount is 100%, okay? And I gave her 4 books. But, you know, that's so simple. I mean, so there's all kinds of things we can do. Here's a guy named Jason. Jason was in my class as a freshman. He came to Baylor on a National Merit Scholarship. He was an atheist. And he enjoyed tormenting the other kids in the dorm who, when they found out he was an atheist, were all trying to share the gospel with him and win him to Christ. But they were starting at way the wrong point, right? And he was really a lot smarter than most of the kids, being a National Merit Scholar. So he had a good time antagonizing him. He was in my class. I had shared various things at the end of the semester. It's a course on engineering design at first, and I do my scientific evidence for the existence of God as the best possible example of design. He didn't ever come back and talk to me in the spring, but in the early fall of his sophomore year, he came by and he said, I've got a couple of questions I'd like to ask. And I said, sure, Jason, what's up? And he asked me a couple of really, really good starting questions. And I said, these are questions that take much more time than 5 or 10 minutes. I said, why don't we go have dinner tonight over at the dormitory? And my wife was teaching Awanas on Wednesday nights, so I said, let's go have a longer talk about that, and we did. I said, and he had more questions. I could tell he was really open. God had somehow, in that 1 year, opened him up. I'm not sure how. So I said, why don't we do a study of the case for Christ in the Gospel of John, and we'll do a chapter a week of each as we go, and have dinner every Wednesday night. He said, oh, I would love that. So fine with me. My wife said Awanas every Wednesday night. I'm on my own. So we went through this, and by the time we got to the 6th chapter of John, he said, you know, it's really different reading the Gospels to see what they say. He said, I've read them to nitpick and irritate all my other students. But he said, when you read them to really understand what they're saying, he said, it's amazing how differently they read. And I think it's amazing how differently they read when the Holy Spirit's drawing you and you're also open as opposed to putting your hands out. At the end of that semester, by then he was already pretty much, I think ready to receive Christ. But we went on through till the end of the semester, and I said, I shared the 4 laws with him at the end of the semester. I said, I don't want you to pray with me. He wasn't my student at that point. He was just my friend. But I said, go home over the Christmas holidays, and if you feel like that's what God's calling you to do, you can have your first Christmas. And he came back in January so excited because he had done exactly that. He went on to be a wonderful young Christian man. We had the chance, I discipled him in some Bible studies, and other people helped. He was baptized. He went on to graduate school at Baylor, and in one of the years he was there, he actually was the parent for a halfway house for recuperating drug addicts, which was a lot of responsibility for somebody who'd only been a Christian at that point 3.5 years. But he was so mature that he could handle it. And the fact that he would even want to do that, what college-age kid wants to go live with a bunch of recuperating drug addicts? This is not it's not a right environment when you're in graduate school. It's not that it isn't worthwhile to do. So, okay, so these are just examples. Let me just skip past these statistics. The main point of this is if 10% of the faculty on your campus were Christians, and I suspect that's true, and if they had some interest in very gentle, simple ways trying to have an influence, they could easily generate 20% of your student body in terms of evangelistic contact. Some people say, well, I don't want to do this because what if the students want to have a Bible study? I don't have time. Trust me, there are lots of campus ministry people or Christian students who would be happy to do that. Maybe the time you have only allows you to do sewing. Maybe it doesn't have time to get involved in doing Bible studies and stuff. Don't let that hold you back. Ministering to colleagues. I think it's really, really important. As I said earlier, we need to be together. Here's 5 guys. They were all, I think, different stages in their spiritual development. The guy on the second one from the left, quite on his own, had become a Christian at the age of about 63. He's a famous marketing professor. He'd written 11 books that were in 5th or 6th editions. I mean, he'd really done well. And on a Christmas Eve, he went to church by himself because he asked his family to go with him because he just had an unction he wanted to go. And they all laughed at him and said, "What are you doing, Dad? You going off your rocker or something?" They'd never been to church in their whole life, the kids or the wife. And he went to church, and in a neat way, he came to Christ all by himself. And then he showed up at our faculty. We used to have a reception at A&M, and we still do. At the beginning of the semester, we invite anybody who wants to come to a reception. And he just showed up and said, "I'm a brand new Christian. I've been a Christian 2 weeks. What do I do next?" And we go, "Tell me how this happened. This is a little unusual at your age, you know." And but anyhow, so he was an eager beaver. The other guys have different stories, but we got together. We met every Monday at 6 a.m., okay? None of us had a conflict at 6 a.m., except for getting out of bed. That was a fairly big conflict. But these guys came faithfully, and we spent a year together doing some discipleship stuff, and it was just a wonderful time of being together. We all benefited. Everybody benefited. So lunchtime Bible studies are fine too. The problem with that is it's a little harder to be consistent if you're doing something that's more discipleship oriented, where it's really kind of important for everybody to come every time. Then there's no university conflicts at 6 a.m. But I think I would really encourage you to have Bible studies, discipleship, but get together with some other Christians on campus and pull together. Okay, let's talk real quickly about outreach through scholarship, okay? Probably at almost every university today, they want you to do scholarship. Traditionally, there was some sort of layering where 4-year schools, you didn't do some, at master's schools, you did some, and at PhD schools, you did more. But it seems like now everybody's getting some pressure to do that. Somebody told me the other day at our school, they want the lecturers to do scholarship, and I thought, that doesn't seem very necessary. But anyhow, what is scholarship? The pursuit of truth as distinct from truth. Now, notice I put truth with capital letters as distinct from truth with small letters. And the distinction that I'm using here was actually used first, at least to my attention, by Mortimer Adler. And he basically says truth with a capital T is truth that is universal in time and space. It's absolute truth. Truth with a small t is cultural, and it's time dependent and geographically dependent. For example, in Switzerland, you greet people with a kiss on both cheeks. In France, you greet somebody with a kiss on one cheek. In the United States, if you go kissing people on the cheek without being invited, you get slapped, okay? Now, so that what I'm saying is the culture of when is appropriate to go kissing around on people's cheeks depends on where you live and probably at what time in history, right? So that's truth with the small t. Okay, truth, okay, this is what we just covered. C.S. Lewis has this to say. I like to think of scholarship as not something that you're obligated to do to win tenure or to get promoted or to get a better raise. Ultimately, that shouldn't be our primary motivation. Here's what C.S. Lewis says, and I really, really like this. I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. Isn't that a neat quote? A Christian should have a different perspective than his non-Christian colleagues. And in that different perspective may be remarkably interesting insights, may be a different choice of what questions are interesting to study. In many different ways it can impact what we do. As I said just a second ago, I think a second way that our Christian worldview, as Lewis describes it, should impact our scholarship is it should impact the questions we find most interesting to study. Let me share with you some examples. Dave Larson, relationship of religious beliefs to physical and emotional health. Does that sound like a topic that a Christian would want to study? Of course. Interestingly enough, when he started this had never been studied. It had been poopy-dooed because a lot of people thought either religion has no effect on your physical health, or if it does, it's probably bad. And certainly on your psychological health, I think the scuttlebutt in a lot of psychiatric literature and so forth is that religion is sort of problematic and causes you to have weird ideas and be unhealthy psychologically. Byron Johnson, a good friend of ours, did a study on the effectiveness of spiritual conversion with Bible study on prison recidivism. Recidivism means how long does it take people to get back to prison? This is a huge problem in the United States because we have so many people incarcerated, so much crime. If they go out and come back and go out and come back, it's lots more crime, lots more cost, and a wasted life, you know? I mean, there's three different ways that this is bad, okay, for everybody. And what he tried to determine was, if people have a conversion in prison and they're involved in Bible study for at least 10 weeks, did it make any difference on how long, on average, they stayed out of prison before they come back? Most people don't realize most people that go to prison and get out end up going back. That's why the population keeps growing, okay? And he was able to show that it can make a dramatic difference. In fact, it was dramatic enough, he was able to go to the state of Texas, when George Bush was governor, and say, here's something that we think really helps. We're trying to think of prison as being what? A place of rehabilitation, of helping people overcome and get out of prison in a way that they don't come back again in a year or two. And the data was very compelling, so George Bush did it. They had the first prison in the country in which it was a state-owned and run prison, but was operated basically by prison fellowship, okay? And nobody was assigned to that prison, but people could choose to go there if they preferred. And of course, a lot of people thinking, well, crud, if you're going to be in prison, it's a pretty rough place. I'd rather be in a Christian prison where maybe you don't get beat up as often or have the awful things happen that can happen to you in prison. It was oversubscribed by 3-1. And then it did a wonderful job of helping the prisoners, if they weren't Christians, to become, if they chose, there was no pressure. They didn't get out any earlier for becoming a Christian. There were no appropriate incentives. And then being discipled so that, and then linking them up with different churches that would want to help them as they came out of prison. And the results were remarkably good. So good that other states have now started this. And it's being done in different places. Now they've started more recently saying a lot of the prisoners want to have seminary training while they're in prison. And so Byron Johnson told me just the other day that there are 28 states that are going to be starting having seminaries in prison. Boy, if you think becoming a Christian helps, how about becoming pastor trained? You know, a good chance that you'll be able to make it through. The Case for Marriage and Against Divorce, The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce. This is an interesting study. These were not necessarily all done by Christians. This lady who had been doing family counseling went back to files that were 25 years old of couples that were going through a divorce, and she contacted, I don't know how she ever found how to contact these people, but she managed to contact many of them and found out what was the impact on children 25 years later. Now, the scuttlebutt today would be what? Oh, they'll get over it. It's not really, it's better than being in a house where people fight or whatever. And her study, and the book she published on it, showed that it made a dramatic difference on the lives of almost every person she recontacted, even 25 years down the road. And this book was written up in the New York Times and a bunch of other places because it was a very well done study. And it basically says if you think getting divorced isn't going to have any impact on your kids, you better think again. Aren't these the kind of questions, if you're in the right field, that would be important to study? We ought to think carefully. Let's choose some important topics. Here's a bunch of other ones, and they're in your notes, so I won't go through all of them. 5 Steps to Forgiveness. I thought this was really good. Ev Worthington. His study was basically on what's the psychological benefit of forgiving. And they say that a huge number of people that are in psychiatric hospitals and stuff are there because they're bitter and angry and they're sort of so psychologically screwed up because they could never forgive, you know. And I think these are wonderful topics, it seems to me, that Christians can say, well, what's the benefit of forgiveness? Well, not forgiving is like being angry and bitter toward another person is like drinking the poison and hoping it'll hurt them, right? It doesn't work that way. Okay, now let's do engineering. People say, well, now, where's the Christian worldview stuff in engineering? You know, this is hard to imagine. How does a Christian bridge differ from a secular bridge? That's a trick question. Anybody want to venture an answer? Adam, you're a PhD chemical engineer. How would a Christian bridge differ from a secular bridge?
It doesn't fall down.
Doesn't fall down. Okay, well, I think secular bridges that fall down cause lawsuits and stuff, so that's not done with impunity. But
Well, ethics, right? When you're Christian, should be more concerned with ethics.
true. Okay, let me show you one. This is one, okay? Now, what's Christian about this bridge? We basically went to a remote place in Kenya where it was 10 miles from the nearest dirt road in the middle of nowhere. On one side of this 140-foot wide river was a village where the women, to go to market on Saturdays, had to carry produce, 25 to 30 pounds, about 20 miles to go to market and 20 miles to come home. How would you like to have a 40-mile hike with a 30-pound pack every week? The children were unable to go to school because they couldn't walk that far. It was just across the river, but they couldn't get across the river. You say, well, why don't they swim? Because it's crocodiles. Okay. Medical care, same thing. So we basically, working with a group called Bridging the Gap Africa, went over. He'd already designed a bridge. He was a builder who went to Africa as a missionary and decided he could do more good, with a lot of good building bridges. And so he designed this bridge, but he wasn't sure how safe it was. He didn't want it to be over-designed because that wastes money. He didn't want it to be under-designed because he didn't want it to fall down. Okay? And so we went over and helped to analyze his design and try to make it better, and then built the bridge with him. These are all the people on one side of the river. The far side of the river is where all the people were who had no access to all these important things. And this bridge was going to save that village of 300 people about 2 million miles worth of walking per year. $5,000. When you figure the cost per pound, or cost per mile, that's really, really cheap transportation. They had a huge celebration. They had, everybody in the village came and they cooked all these big pots of food and mystery meat and other things, and invited us all to eat. I was really sort of trying to avoid eating. I thought the beans and rice was safe because it had been boiled. I wasn't at all sure about the rest of it, but it turned out half the people in the village are Christians. The village chief is a Christian. They had a prayer of dedication for the bridge. They gave thanks for God sending these people as an answer to their prayers to help them to not be as isolated as they had been. It was one of the most fun things that we ever did. Okay, there's other things we can talk about. I'm going to talk about something right at the end if we have time. Let's talk about research topics, okay? This is a big pit mine. If you look, right in here is it's a city, and that gives you a little bit of a scale when you see how the city looks and look how big the pit is. This is the biggest gold mine in the world. It's the biggest pit mine in the world as well. Now, if you're one investing in gold mining, would you want to put more money into this mine? I kind of think not, okay? I think they've mined it out, pretty much. I think one of the problems that we have in research is that people often consider their dissertation topic as their mine. And depending on their advisor and where this topic came from and how long it's been around, you may be gold mining in a mine that's pretty much done. Now, if you're mining in a mine where there is little or if any gold, then you can be very smart in how you do the digging and so forth. You can be very diligent in how hard you work. And if there isn't any gold, there isn't any gold, right? So I think the most critical thing in gold mining is to find a good place where there's lots of gold. It's kind of like fruit picking. If you're the last one into the orchard, guess what? All the low-hanging fruit is gone. And the high-hanging fruit's hard to get to, and it's not very good. So the best time to do orchard picking is to be what? Early into the orchard. If it's gold mining, it's to be what? Early into the gold mine. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to be very successful. Let's talk about how we find a good gold mine topic. I had once a graduate student. I'd been doing high-performance composites for about 12 or 13 years when he came. It was a great field when we started. We were first into the orchard. We got so far down the road compared to other people that I went 12 years writing a proposal without ever having one turned down, when the normal percentages are like 20%. But we were first in the mine, and there was a lot of gold, and it gave us it wasn't a free ride, but boy, it was an easy ride. And I had major companies like DuPont, Dow Chemical, and 3M coming and asking me, could they give me $60,000 this year to do different things related to what we were doing. So it was wonderful. Write a 2-page proposal, get 60 grand 3 times around. It was really terrific. But now that was beginning to get to the end of it, and I didn't want this new PhD student who was a neat Christian who wanted to go into teaching, very smart kid with a National Merit Scholarship. So I wrote a proposal in a very brand new area that I thought was going to be very, very fruitful, rapid prototyping. And I asked him one day, I said, are you praying about our proposal? And he said, well, no, I pray for my Bible study, and I pray for my wife, and I pray for this, that, and the other. And I said, well, let me tell you something. If we don't get this NSF project that I proposed funded, then you're not going to be able to start in a brand new area that's really, really going to be much better. We'll do something in composites, but I think that's a mature area, and I don't recommend it. Okay? It's been around too long. I said, so if we don't get it, you'll probably not do a project that'll help you get a good teaching job, and you'll be out of luck. Now, I was kind of exaggerating only a little bit. I wanted him to be scared to death, okay? I said, you pray every night about this, because if it doesn't come through, you're screwed, okay? Let's be clear. Now, he prayed really hard. I prayed really hard. It's the only NSF project I ever had funded twice. I had submitted it in a unsolicited situation, and then later they had a specified topical one, which was what we were doing. So I sent it into that one too. And I got a phone call from NSF saying, now we've got 2 proposals here that are both recommended for funding, but they look really, really similar. And I said, you're right, they're identical. Okay, well, not identical, we changed it slightly. So I said, fund one or the other, just give us the $375,000, okay? We'll be happy. And and then it turned out, it worked out great for him. We were early in that orchard. He's had a terrific career. He's had lots of funding all of his life. He's a chaired professor at a university now, and it worked out great. But it wouldn't have worked out as great if we'd been doing something that I've been doing for 15 years. That's, you know. So I think the point is, don't keep doing your dissertation topic forever. It may or may not be a good gold mine, okay? My experience as department head at Texas A&M, I had 67 faculty in my department. The most important thing I did and the most time-consuming thing I did was to do annual reviews for an hour and a half. And here's what I observed over time. Smartest people in my department were not necessarily the most successful in research. Most hardworking people in my department were not necessarily the most successful in research. Critical choice of a research area was extremely important. Willingness to change areas as one's area becomes mature was also essential. More work in the short run, less work in the long run. I had a friend ask me in 1977 would I like to work with him in an Air Force grant that he was getting on polymeric composite materials, and I'd been doing metals all of my life. I knew a little bit about polymers. I had one course in graduate school. Okay, it's not very much. But I had a good basic background in material science, and I had taken all the different fundamentals courses, and so I thought I can learn this. And so I worked real hard, and that proved to be the single most important decision I ever made. Now, it wasn't an easy decision, because the easier thing would be what? I've been at Colorado School of Mines for 8 years. I'm at A&M now. I already have funding in that area. I have background and so forth. And to make that kind of a change was really pretty scary. It took a fair amount of work, but I knew there was nobody doing anything in this area. That was not very many people, and it's a good area to get into. And so I thought, boy, if I can be first in the orchard, even if I have to learn how to pick better, it's going to work. And it was the best decision I ever made. By 1989, part of the driver on this was to make all composite airplanes for the military. And for commercial eventually, but not immediately. When the Cold War kind of wrapped down quite a bit in 1989, a lot of that money I could picture was going to go away pretty soon. And so we had to find something entirely different to do. So we went and said, we can help make offshore drilling at 6,000 feet possible with floating platforms at 2,000 feet if we replaced all the steel tubulars, which weigh 100 million pounds on one platform, with composite tubulars. Now, normally composites are way too expensive to use for offshore. But this was going to save them billions of dollars in building a platform big, 3 times bigger than the one they'd been building. And so we got NSF funding for 11 years to do that. And look at the moisture effects on long-term durability. So you have to keep changing horses. You can't ride the same one forever and ever. Okay, let's talk just a little bit about publish or perish. Here's the cynical view of publish or perish. It's a game that academics play without any practical significance. And it feels that way sometimes, doesn't it? Second view is a stewardship view. If research is paid for by the public as much as, whether you have a research grant or whether you teach 2 courses and get half of your time for doing research, somebody else is paying for it. Would you agree? Somebody's paying for it. Then we have a responsibility to make available what we have learned to the public at large by publishing in archival journals. And here's the third view, the one I prefer. The love view, God gives us significant insights in our research that are to be shared with other people to make their lives better and their appreciation of God and His goodness greater. And I like that one the best. Okay. Finally, my final research area that I started when I went to Baylor, converting coconut waste into commercial products. Coconut farmers make $500 a year, typically have 5 to 6 kids. $500 a year, $2 a day, less than $2 a day. They get coconut oil out of their coconuts, and most of the shell and the husk is just waste. So our goal was to say, let's take the agricultural waste and find something useful that we can do with it. Okay? Now, without getting through all the story, let me simply say, God blessed us. Coconuts have lots of useful properties. I was so thrilled when we started studying. I thought this could all just be trash. I mean, you can say, look, it's trash. There's nothing you can do with it. But it turned out it wasn't just trash. It had lots of interesting properties, and we were able to figure out what those were and how to find good applications for them. We actually have started a company which has a office in College Station, 10,000 square feet with 15 employees. We have a production facility in Indonesia that has 100 employees, and we hope we'll eventually have 1,000. We're providing jobs for people in an area of Indonesia which is primarily Muslim, and we think this will be a wonderful way to meet their economic needs, which they're desperately poor. Also helping the farmers as well as the unemployed city people, and providing a platform from which the gospel can be presented. Okay, so, and this is our research lab, and here's some of the kind of stuff we make, children's toys. You'll be seeing soon at Bed Bath & Beyond, is that the right name? Cutting boards that are going to be made with our stuff, children's toys, door panels for automobiles. We're working with Ford Motors and some other major companies I can't name yet. I can name Ford because we got an innovation award with them, and now we're already publicly linked with them. And how all that happened is a whole long story with many other miracles, okay? Thank you for your time and attention.